LJPH asks, is North Korean tourism inherently unethical? What's the best way to experience North Korea for those who are curious? It's a great question. First of all, whether or not something is inherently unethical is really subjective. There are people who think it's unethical to visit Israel. There are people who think it's unethical to visit Saudi Arabia, Russia, the United States. At the end of the day, it all comes down to what your morals and your values are as to whether or not you think it's unethical. As for my opinion, no, I don't think it's inherently unethical. I think that it's actually beneficial to North Koreans as a whole because, yes, in theory, you're giving money to the regime. However, the amount of money that they get from tourism is negligible, and I don't think anybody should feel like they're supporting a totalitarian state by choosing to visit it. And on the flip side, I would say that you're doing a service to North Koreans because by visiting there and interacting with North Korean people, you're showing them what the outside world is really like, in the sense that you're undermining the government propaganda that foreigners are subhuman and that they're bad and they're out to kill you. So I think North Korean tourism actually benefits the North Korean people more than it benefits the state. So I hope that answers your first question. As for your second question, what's the best way to experience North Korea for people who are curious? I mean, visiting North Korea would obviously be the best way to experience the country, of course. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the borders are closed. So what's the second best way to experience North Korea? My channel, of course. That's just my opinion. Thank you for asking a great question. Sam Korea asks, what do you think about sanctions imposed on North Korea? Can they really achieve something? We've already seen that sanctions on North Korea have done absolutely nothing to deter it from procuring nuclear weapons, as well as from surviving. And you don't even really need to look at North Korea to see that sanctions fundamentally don't work. I mean, look at Cuba. We've blockaded that country since the 1960s, and that country, not only has it survived, but they have the best education standards in Latin America, they have the best healthcare in Latin America, they have a lung cancer vaccine that we can't even get because of said sanctions. So I don't think there's any shadow of a doubt that sanctions fundamentally don't work. They don't do anything to detour a nation's leadership from stepping out of line, so to speak. I think they're a gigantic waste of time, and I think it's just an excuse for politicians to say that they're doing something without actually having to try. So, great question. Thank you. Rudy Speaks asks, already knowing your opinion of the Dprk, what are your opinion of its adversaries, i.e. the West and such? Oh, there's a long answer. Well, it's no secret that I live in the United States, the country that is considered to be the premier adversary of the Dprk. And while hating on the United States is kind of the popular thing right now, not saying some of it isn't warranted, I don't have inherently a negative opinion of my home country. It's the country I was born and raised in, educated in. I'm fundamentally an American citizen. I love this country, much in the same way that you love your country. Not saying it's perfect. I have a whole laundry list of problems with it, but as far as the West as a whole, I think the fundamental problem with the West is that we have this sort of ethnocentric belief that Western values, Western-style republics and democracies and such are morally and objectively right. And I think that the West would be a lot better off if it realized that there's no one correct way to govern, there's no one correct socioeconomic model, there's no one correct system of governance. I think that the West really needs to stop interfering in the world's affairs. We definitely need to stop interfering in the Middle East. We absolutely have no business in trying to control the Middle East. They have every right in the world to determine their own future. And the United States and the Western allies, we need to get out. And I feel the same way of the Russian Federation as well. The Syrian people deserve the right to determine their own future. And that's that. And it's the same thing with the North Korean people or the Cuban people, the Chinese people. I mean, look, there are people who are willing to trade democracy for simplicity. And I think that if the majority of people in North Korea or China or any other country that's not a standard Western democracy decide that, hey, we don't want a Western-style republic. We don't want a free market system. We want to have a socialist single-party state. that should be respected, and that shouldn't be something that we should spend all of our time and resources on trying to overthrow and undermine. So, my fundamental problem with the West is that we haven't completely shed our colonialist and imperialist ways. We're just masquerading it as spreading freedom and democracy around the world, and that needs to end. But other than that, it's my home. Thanks for the question. Confidential asks, are there any video records of the Dprk rioting against Iran during a football match? Is there any evidence of a crackdown after that? First things first, I don't really watch football, or soccer as it's called in the United States. That sport is extremely popular everywhere but the United States, so I really don't know. I did try searching for footage of it, but I was unable to track down anything. So I apologize to give you a non-answer, but we're talking about footage between a match of two of the most secretive nations on Earth. So any records or any footage of it likely isn't going to exist publicly, or if it is, it's going to be pretty hard to find. So again, I hate to give you a non-answer, but I wasn't able to find anything. But I will look, and if I find it, you'll be the first to know. Thanks for the question. Cyrillic username with a portrait of Kim Il-sung asks, what do you think about Kim Jong-un? It's kind of hard to say, because if I say how I feel about him personally, I mean, obviously he's the leader of a increasingly authoritarian regime that now has nuclear weapons and could potentially be a security threat to East Asia and the world. So I certainly say he concerns me, but I think what you're asking is, how do I feel about him in comparison to Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung? And I think it's really hard to say, because I can talk about how I think that Kim Jong-un is a better leader than Kim Jong-il, but at the end of the day, Kim Jong-un didn't have to face the same problems that Kim Jong-il did. So a lot of people will look at Kim Jong-il and say he was a horrible leader. He started the Jong-un policy, which diverted the majority of North Korea's resources during a famine into preserving the military. However, when you take a closer look at the Jong-un policy, you realize that had Kim Jong-il not done that, the military likely would have rebelled and overthrown him, and North Korea wouldn't exist today. So, not saying that wouldn't be a good or a bad thing, I'm just saying that's what likely would have happened. So, in terms of preserving the North Korean regime, Kim Jong-il was ultimately very successful in doing what he had to do to make sure that North Korea continued to exist as a sovereign state. And that meant neglecting the country as a whole for a while. And so Kim Jong-un, I think, is largely trying to portray himself as sort of the Kim Il-sung 2.0, I guess. He's really trying to bank upon people's affinity for, his grandfather, Kim Il-sung. And so he's more or less ended the Jong-un policy and trying to reorient his nation's wealth and resources on helping ordinary North Koreans live better lives. And that's always a good thing. Tyrannical leader or not, nobody is purely good or purely evil. Everybody is capable of doing good things. Everybody's capable of doing bad things. And if Kim Jong-un is doing good things to help his people live better lives, then credit where credit's due. I applaud that. So overall, would I say that he's a better leader than his father? It's complicated, but yes. But do I think that he's a good person? That's for history to decide. Thanks for the question. Mary asks, are there any official North Korean singers that have defected? I think I heard of one lady, but I don't remember who. You might be thinking of a North Korean classical musician, Kim Chol-ung, who defected in 2003 and has since gone on to be a relatively successful musician in South Korea. As far as North Korean singers of the caliber like Ri Kyung-suk or Ri Sol-ju are concerned, I don't believe any have officially defected. North Korean singers that are a part of famous groups like Pachonbo Electronic Ensemble or the Unhasu Orchestra are very tightly controlled and are members of the 1/10 of the 1% of North Korean society. So there's little incentive for them to defect unless, of course, their lives are at stake. And if their lives are at stake, they're likely in Pyongyang, so they're not going anywhere. So I'm not aware of any premier North Korean singers who have voluntarily defected to South Korea simply because there's little incentive for them to do so. Thanks for the question. Zas asks, do you think the North Korean elite understands how Western countries' political system works? Because if I was Kim Jong-un, I would try to help South Korean liberals win elections. By the way, I'm from Germany, and the East Germans knew exactly how West Germany worked and bribed 2 members of parliament in 1972 to keep Liberal Chancellor in office. The Chancellor, Willy Brandt, won the vote by exactly 2 votes. That's impressive. East Germans were a resourceful bunch, that's for sure. Fundamentally, though, I think your question is kind of based on the assumption that, at least here in the United States, that liberals are socialists, and at least in the United States and in South Korea as well, liberals are center-right at best. There's no real left-wing party in the United States or in South Korea, both staunchly anti-communist nations, and so even the slightest left-wing push is going to send people over the edge. So I think, yes, to answer your question, I think that North Korean elites do understand how a democracy works. However, I think that due to the inherent anti-communist nature of South Korea, that any attempted bribes just likely wouldn't work. They wouldn't have a dramatic effect on South Korea's overall policy towards the North would be. I mean, we saw the Sunshine Policy. We saw how it spectacularly failed with the sinking of the Cheonan. And even Moon Jae-in's own rapprochement to North Korea has largely failed, along with Donald Trump's rapprochement. He's a Republican. So, to answer your question, I mean, I'm sure they do try and bribe senior South Korean officials, but overall, that's not enough to drastically change the course of how South Korea as a whole is going to treat and view North Korea. So I think it's just important to understand that the dynamic between East and West Germany and North and South Korea, while similar on paper, is still fundamentally different because Germans and Koreans are fundamentally different people and how their governments work are different. So that's a good question, though. Thank you for asking. This next question is one that was asked by both a Fabian Guzman as well as a Kim Myung-ok, which is basically, what do you think Joe Biden's strategy towards North Korea is going to be? And my opinion is Joe Biden, being the disappointing neoliberal that he is, he's just going to continue the same 40-year-long policy of non-engagement and just repeated sanctions, and basically the same useless policy that we've been doing since the tail end of the Reagan administration, back when we first knew they were pursuing nuclear weapons. And it's going to accomplish absolutely nothing. It's not going to lead to any sort of agreement with North Korea. And this is actually one of the few instances where I have to give Donald Trump credit. I mean, I'm not a Trump supporter. I mean, I try to view everybody as a person. I don't like to play political football. I don't like to take sides. I like to view people based upon their own merits. And I think that democratic countries, especially the U.S., would be a lot better off if we did exactly that. What I'm trying to say is, even though I've been very critical of Donald Trump during his entire tenure as presidency, credit where credit is due, he was the one president in the last 40 years to actually take the right approach as far as being willing to meet with these leaders like Kim Jong-un and offer a framework of a peace deal, potentially. I mean, it didn't go anywhere ultimately because Donald Trump ultimately wasn't a serious president. He was in it for himself, not for the good of the people. But, as they say, a stopped clock is right twice a day. Joe Biden, by contrast, is just going to continue the policies of old, which is just sanctioning them and hoping it'll go away. I'm not in any way, shape, or form confident in Joe Biden's ability to broker any type of peace deal. I don't see him even trying. However, even if he were to break my expectations and meet with Kim Jong-un, the idea that Joe Biden...
I got hairy legs. Corn Pop was a bad dude.
...is going to be some sort of master negotiator is doubtful at best. So thank you for your question. Kim Myung-ok goes on to ask, If you could visit anywhere in the DPRK, where would it be? And what is your favorite dinosaur? Two excellent questions, Yong-il. If I could go anywhere in the DPRK, it would probably be the city of Nampo. I think it's a very beautiful city, a really nice port city, and it also has an apple orchard there that I really want to visit for no specific reason other than that it just interests me. Yeah, really nice. Another place would probably be the Kumgang mountain range, which pretty much anybody who goes to North Korea probably wants to see that. So yeah, that would be my answer to your first question. As for your other question, I was gonna say Quetzalcoatlus, however, pterosaurs are actually not dinosaurs. So my favorite strict dinosaur would be the Carcharodontosaurus, or the shark-toothed dinosaur. Really cool. Thanks for asking. So now we're moving on to the questions that were emailed to me. I'm going to treat them anonymously by not revealing the name of the person who sent them. So the first one is, thoughts on Yeonmi Park's growing popularity and presence on YouTube. I see that your video on her and her apparent inconsistencies with regard to her story on growing up in the DPRK has gotten over 30,000 views with quite a bit of dislikes. I know that you said she was a victim of the oppressive state while being nuanced, but it seems like some people in that comment don't wish to understand and wish to think that simply watching foreign films in DPRK is a death sentence. Okay? So basically, what do I think about her growing presence on YouTube, and how does the reaction to the video I did on Yeonmi Park, how does the negative reaction make me feel? To answer the first part of your question, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that she has a YouTube channel. I mean, she obviously has a very large following, and yeah, it's financially speaking, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if I were in her position, I probably would have a YouTube channel too. Hell, I'm not in her position and I have a YouTube channel, so, you know, it is what it is. People who follow her and people who believe her are gonna watch her stuff. I mean, that's just how the world works. As far as to the reaction on my video, I'm not gonna say that it never bothered me, but it doesn't bother me in the way that you might think. So first and foremost, none of my videos have ever been even remotely as popular as that one. And so as more and more people who weren't really into North Korea, casual people, started watching the video and just, you know, bombarding me with dislikes, I mean, yeah, I'm not going to say it didn't bother me. I'd never been exposed to that much criticism before, and I'll be the first to admit that I probably didn't handle it in the way that I should have initially, and I see that, and all I can do is grow from it. So, but more specifically, it isn't so much that people disagree with what I said in the video that bothers me. It's the fact that people have seemed to have lost the ability to be objective. Now, what do I mean about that? The overwhelming majority of people who disagree with what I said in the video typically lodge personal attacks at me, or their entire point is either based off of emotions, like she's a trauma survivor, she should be respected, and how dare you attack her for telling her story. I wasn't. Nobody ever really seemed to. People miss the point of the video. The point of the video wasn't that she shouldn't tell her story, or that she should be silenced, rather. The point of the video was simply pointing out the inconsistencies and saying that I want you to make your own decision. And if people watched the video with an objective mind and they still came out at the end believing her, that's fine. That's what I wanted. It's the people who didn't do that. It's the people who watched the video for 5 minutes and already had their mind made up before they even clicked on it. And to quote, I like to think of a quote from Bill Nye when he made the video on Big Think about creationism. He said, you know, people who take the time to hate you and say mean things, these aren't people you're going to reason with. We each have pretty much made up our own minds. So it doesn't bother me so much that people disagree with me. It bothers me that objectivity and critical thinking seems to be lost on the population as a whole these days. People don't know what the burden of proof is. People don't know what emotional reasoning versus logical reasoning are. And that's what saddens me. And I really hope that people down the road will learn to look at something more critically and to always take any claim with a grain of salt. It doesn't matter what it is. This pertains to politics, religion, scientific articles, anything. You having a skeptical point of view is the best defense you can have. It's the best resource that you can use to ensure that you aren't being cheated, that you aren't being lied to, that you aren't being taken for a fool. So I always encourage everybody to be skeptical of things, not because I want people to be cynical, but it's just the best frame of mind to have as we navigate this information-filled world that we live in. So I hope that answers your question, and I don't hate Yeonmi Park. I certainly don't want people to attack her personally. I just want people to know both sides of the story. That's it. So I hope that answers your first question. The second question from this user reads, what other topics for your Mysteries of North Korea do you have planned? I think the topic on the Ryanggang explosion that happened in 2004 would be interesting, or the peculiar Kanghae incident in 1991 in which the number 26 general plan exploded, killing unknown numbers of people. So, with regards to Mysteries of North Korea, I don't really have like a set schedule of anything that like I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this. It's just typically whatever topic that I come across in browsing the internet. I might think, oh, that might be a good video, and work from there. So one video that I'm sort of starting to work on right now is analyzing the various political parties in North Korea, and just the political structure in general in North Korea, because a lot of people don't realize that the Workers' Party of Korea is not the only political party in North Korea. There are 3 main ones, and I thought I should take the time to sort of break that down and talk about them. So that's probably going to be the next one. Another one was the disappearance of an American who was widely believed to have been abducted by North Koreans while he was in China. I plan that's going to be an episode further down the road too. And as far as the Ryanggang explosion and the Kanghae incident, I've researched them before, and definitely they'll be there. It's just Mysteries of North Korea is pretty much everything related to North Korea that isn't movies. Like, it's a pretty broad series that I do that covers all sorts of topics. So yeah, those are the 2 that are probably going to be coming next, and after that we'll see. So I hope that answers your second question. The next question is, while the Dprk is not facing anything remotely as bad as the US or others have faced with regard to COVID-19, do you think that it's possible the Dprk has or had cases of COVID? Yeah, I think it's undeniable that North Korea has had cases of COVID. Due to its geographic proximity to China, the origin point of the COVID-19 virus, I think the chances that North Korea has had no COVID cases at all is practically 0. Now, as to whether or not they've been devastated by it on the scale as it has in other countries, that's anybody's guess. We don't know. North Korea doesn't publicly release its infection rates, and according to official government propaganda, there is no COVID-19 pandemic in North Korea. So, but I can point to recent articles. For example, there was an article I'll post it when I'm making this video that North Korean intelligence agencies were caught trying to steal it was one of the vaccine companies, either Pfizer or AstraZeneca, was trying to steal their ingredients for the COVID-19 vaccine. There wouldn't be any reason for them to do that unless they already had COVID. And so yeah, I think it's pretty likely that COVID-19 has found its way to North Korea. As to what extent, that's anybody's guess. So thank you for the question. Would you be interested in branching out and focusing on other topics related to the Dprk? Yeah, that's pretty much what Mysteries of North Korea is. I mean, there's North Korean movie reviews, which speaks for itself. Then there's North Korean songs in English, which also speaks for itself. And then there's Mysteries of North Korea, which is kind of like everything else. So any other topic that isn't movies or songs, it's going to be included in the Mysteries of North Korea series. I also have a playlist called Opinion Pieces, where it's just kind of the very few things that don't fit into that broad category that is Mysteries of North Korea. So, like, one video that I've been on and off working on was the story of my friend who was actually from North Korea, but, like, not a defector. Like, she was legit still a North Korean citizen, but she was studying abroad. I plan on talking about that experience, just kind of got shelved, but it's something I'll be working on releasing pretty soon. So to answer your question, yes, of course. And nothing is off limits. If it's related to North Korea, I'll make a video on it. So I hope that answers your questions. And thank you for sending them. Will you start a Discord? No. In all honesty, like this YouTube channel that I have, North Korea Uncovered, the entire thing is only done by myself. I have a friend who will edit scripts that I write, or have suggestions and occasionally contribute, but he's not like an official part of the channel. The channel is still just me. And outside of the YouTube channel, the only other presence I have on social media is a Facebook page, which you should all follow, by the way. But even then, I have... it's hard for me to even keep my Facebook page up to date, never mind an entire Discord. And I don't really know anybody or trust anybody that could effectively moderate it in the event that I'm not actively on the Discord page, which would be like 90% of the time. So unfortunately, that's just not in the cards right now. Now, further down the road, if my channel suddenly explodes in popularity, yeah, I'm not going to rule it out. But as it stands, no, I have no plans for Discord at any point. So thank you for asking. What are your favorite non-North Korean movies? Do you have a favorite genre? This might come as a surprise to many of you, but I actually don't really like movies. I much prefer to play games. I guess if I had a favorite genre, I'd say horror, but most horror movies today are terrible. The Conjuring movies are just terrible jump scare bullshit. There's a lot of like really popular movies that I've never ever seen, like Pulp Fiction. I've never seen it, never care to see it. The Big Lebowski, never seen it. Citizen Kane, never seen it. I'm just not a movie person. I hate Marvel movies. I think they're crap. It's just, I don't know. I'm not a movie person. I'm not the type of person you can sit down and talk about movies with. I think the last movie that I went and saw in theaters was the It Part 2, the film adaptation of Stephen King's novel. I saw both movies. The first movie I saw when I was in South Korea, my wife and I went to go see it, and I actually enjoyed it because there were actually a lot more elements of the book that made it into the two Stephen King movies. The two most recent It movies, the one that came out in 2017, 2019, there was a lot more of the book that made it into those movies than made it into the 1990s TV series. So I enjoyed those actually, but other than that, no, I'm not a movie person at all. So yeah. And of course, this always leads to the question, well, if you hate movies, why do you review North Korean movies? And again, I don't review them because I like them, but because they're an important tool for understanding the cultural nuances and gaining a general understanding of what people think and what society there is supposed to be like. Even if it's a government-sanctioned point of view, there's still something that we can take away from it. So that's why I do it. So thank you for the question. Moving on to our last two questions, we have quite an obvious one. Best and worst North Korean movies you have seen, and do you think that the Dprk is going to slowly be a more capitalistic system since the declarations at the 8th Workers' Party of Korea Congress or not? So to answer your first question, my favorite North Korean film is probably Dorajikot, A Broad Bellflower. I think that's probably the most well-acted and best story overall. The film it's a propaganda film. They all are, but it probably has the most realistic depictions of emotion that I've ever seen in a North Korean film. You do, if you take the time to put yourself in their shoes, you can find yourself relating to a lot of the characters. And all in all, I think it's the best example of North Korean melodrama, and it gives you a really good insight as to how their society operates and how it views certain things. So I would recommend people watch that if they want to gain an insight into North Korea. The worst film, that's a tie. The worst North Korean film still has to be Two Families in Handong, probably, simply because the husband in the film, Ri Gun-ho is the name of the actor, is just this extremely neglectful and abusive, oblivious man who gets a pass for all of his horrible behavior because he's working for the country to produce some welding tool or some stupid shit. He gets a free pass to be a neglectful sack of shit father because it's for the good of the country or whatever. And to me, it's a product of the state that North Korea was in at that time, so I don't really know that that's really still how people are expected to feel now, but it's just a terrible film, and it's precisely indicative of everything that was wrong in the country at the time. So, to answer your second question, I really don't see North Korea moving in a more capitalistic system. And there's a few reasons for that. Number one, I think North Korea's leadership will look at what happened with the Soviet Union when they tried doing that, perestroika and glasnost, and they'll look to avoid something like that. Because once North Korean people get a taste of capitalism, and especially if the country like socially and politically liberalizes to the point where they're not sheltered anymore, they're going to see what South Korea, and China and all those other liberalized countries are like, and they're going to toss the Kim family to the wind. So I don't think it's very likely that North Korea is going to liberalize its economy. I think command economy, top-down economic structure is going to remain at the epicenter of the North Korean economy for the time being. Even though Kim Jong-un's latest 5-year plan failed, he attributed that failure largely to the COVID-19 pandemic and has already announced a new 5-year plan. So my answer would be not as long as the Kim family is still at the epicenter of the North Korean ideology, because you have to remember Juche is centered around the idea that Korean people are inherently weak, and only through a central leader can they be strong, can they realize their true potential. And the Kim family, the Mount Paektu bloodline, is that nucleus of North Korean society under the Juche philosophy. So in order for that to even work for North Korea, in order for North Korea to even begin to liberalize, they'd have to pretty much abandon the Juche idea. And that's not going to happen while Kim Jong-un or his family is in power. So that's my answer to your question. All right, guys, well, that's the end of the questions. I want to thank everybody who took the time to send in questions, and then it was great sitting here talking about them, getting to know you a little bit more, and hopefully you got to know a little bit more about me in the process as well. So I promise we'll do this again very soon. It was great doing this video, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.